July 25th, 2022, regular school board meeting. Mrs. Cahill, please call the roll.
Mr. Grant?
Present.
Mr. Carpenter?
Present.
Mr. Leeds?
Here.
Mrs. Hagedorn?
Here.
And Mr. Fulham?
Present.
Would everyone please join me for the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Item 1.3, any additions or deletions to the agenda? I see that we're deleting item 7.7, the Board of Education meeting dates for next year. Thank you for doing that. All right. May I have a motion?
So moved.
Thank you, Mrs. Hagedorn.
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Leeds. Mrs. Cahill, please call the roll.
Mrs. Hagedorn?
Aye.
Mr. Leeds?
Aye.
Mr. Fulham?
Aye.
Mr. Carpenter?
Aye.
And Mr. Grant?
Aye. Motion carried. Item 1.4, approve the agenda. May I have a motion?
So moved.
Thank you, Mr. Fulham.
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Carpenter. Mrs. Cahill, please call the roll.
Mr. Fulham?
Aye.
Mr. Carpenter?
Aye.
Mr. Leeds?
Aye.
Mrs. Hagedorn?
Aye.
And Mr. Grant?
Aye. Motion carried. Moving on to section 2, discussion and comments from the board, starting with legislative 2.1. Mr. Leeds.
Nothing at this time. Everybody's on vacation in Columbus.
What's new? Just kidding. Oops. Sorry.
I was going to say that, but you beat me to it.
All right. Item 2.2, Mr. Guido, Butler Tech. Thanks for joining us this evening.
Mr. President, Vice President, Superintendent, appreciate you having me. I've given you your success. Two things I want to point out. First of all, the article on the front cover about the carpentry class building the play set for the kid with cerebral palsy. The instructor's name is Tim Carpenter, and I did want to point out that it is not the illustrious Vice President. Yeah. So anyway, good story in there. And I did want to make note of the passing of Robert Otto. He was a longtime instructor at our police officer academy, and basically established the footprint for what that program is today. So condolences to his family. The big news since we have talked last, Butler County did release their ESSER funds to us. We did receive $15 million of those funds, and those it is less. We had requested $24 million. They cut out the one-year operating costs for both those programs. So advanced manufacturing at the Miami University Hamilton campus will go in there, as well as the aviation program at Hookfield in Middletown. So both of those programs will expand. Both secondary and adult ed will have expansions for both of those programs. So even though we got less money, there's still enough to do. We're going to offset some of that with some of our permanent improvement funds, and then obviously our general fund will take care of some of that. So some way, somehow, we're going to continue to expand. I had said at the end of last year that one of our goals is to continue enrollment capabilities for Butler Tech. Last thing we want to do is tell somebody they didn't get into the program. So on that same note, we do have expansions that I want to talk about. We do have two programs that are senior-only programs this year, and this is a first try for us this year. So kids that, again, didn't get into their junior year had an opportunity to be called in for the senior-only program. So one of them is a welding program. The welding class is going to be at Le Swordsville campus. Right now we do adult ed instruction there, but we're going to utilize that space. So those 25 kids have already been offered those positions. All of them have been accepted right away. And then also there's an EMT program at the public safety building. I think you guys have been there. That's where the gun range and everything is. Yeah. 25 students there as well. So that expanded both of those programs. How it's going to work is they're going to take academics at their home school, and then they will go to those separate campuses for both of those programs. So exciting for that. Hopefully this is successful, and we'll continue to see other expansions to allow them to do that. One of the things we've talked about is, and this is not available, so don't hold this, I don't know how this would work, but if there is a carpentry program like at Hamilton High School that is not full, if a Monroe student, for example, wanted to get into that carpentry program, would he be able to go to Hamilton to do that? So obviously there's a lot of logistics to be worked out. The money would have to follow, and that has to make sense for not only Butler Tech, but also for the home school. But those are some ways that we're looking at potentially expanding the capacity limits that we face. So it's a good problem to have, but it's a horrible problem to have when you tell a kid they can't get in. So, but very good news on the 2 expansions that we did do. Third is the natural science update. You can go by and see almost all the windows are in. I couldn't see on the backside. Either all the windows are in or most of them are in. Doors are going on next. There's a few doors. So once that happens, the building will be a lot cooler because they also got the HVAC completed, and drywall has begun in there. So things are moving along very quickly, barring any delays from our stuff that's being shipped or not being shipped. Looks like the completion date is still on for October. So as soon as we get a final number or a date, I will let you guys know. Clearly, you guys are going to be front and center for that completion there. And then the last thing that I talked about, our work session that we were going to have, we did hold that at our last meeting last Tuesday. Went pretty well. Open dialogue about, again, how the board can help our administrators and staff with, reaching our 5 goals that we have set for the year. So we're pretty well. Any questions?
Brad, I'd like to blue sky a little bit.
Okay.
I would like to know, and I know this is being an infant thing, but I'd like to know if Butler Tech would be able to maybe give some ground to the city to have a community center down there.
At the, where at?
At Americana.
At Americana?
Yeah.
I know that in the very beginning when that transfer of land or the purchase of the land was taking place, there were different discussions about that. We had actually, one of the things that we have talked about in the past is some sort of, this is kind of big sky, so again, don't take that out there as well. Some sort of a auditorium. I'm talking like a very large one, almost like a conference center. But that would require a partnership between the city of Monroe and Butler County, likely to have that. If you think of Butler County, there is no large venue for people to go. I mean, if you want to see Spooky Nook, I mean, that's very large, but I don't know the capacity of seating through that because I haven't done that tour yet. But that's an example of some of the things that we have looked at future use for that land. I don't think that land will be vacant forever, obviously. But, I mean, we're more than willing to have open conversations with anybody that wants to talk about maybe a joint use thing for that. So, and I know Mr. Brock and John Graff have spoke about some of that as well. So, yeah, I mean,
Okay.
never say never
Good.
on any of that.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Moving on to item 2.3, finance.
We had a meeting with Holly and Robert and I had a meeting to go over the grants, and we've talked about that, and you guys have got all the data on that. We'll bring that up some more tonight. And just a general looking at the budget, and things like this, to see if we can tighten up our forecasting a little bit to where we know more exact terms of what the forecasts are and things of that. Nothing out of the ordinary. So, but we'll keep you posted on that. And then the other thing is, we have made the comment that we are going to be in expenditure mode, so to speak, for various things this fall to look at. And with the building, not the building, but the remodeling going on in this building here, and maybe a field house of some kind where we can move people out to where we can utilize more space in here for students in the building, things of that nature. So more to come on that, but that's in the wind.
Okay, thank you. 2.4.
Real quick, just to clarify, like the expenditure is so that way we can get the ELP locked in, not just so we can spend money, but so we can get
Right.
moving forward with
Right.
securing our state
Yeah.
share of money for the construction project.
Some will be, if we were to do a field house, that will not fall under
Okay, got it.
that. But any remodeling within the building and or updating to the existing building would fall under that. If they would, approval process. We're working through the approval process.
Gotcha.
But you are correct, that is all part of the master plan here.
Sure.
Because we have an overflow building, we have current construction going on, we have to meet the ELP. So we have a lot of things in the fire right now to get working by the time, say, this time next year.
Right.
So,
It's going to be very active.
yes. All right. Anything else?
That's it.
Thank you. 2.4, student achievement.
Nothing to report. Everybody's enjoying their summer vacation, and we're right around the corner from the start of the school year. I'm sure we'll have plenty of things to share here in the next few meetings.
2.5, no one from MEA? All right. Moving on to section 3, and seeing that there's no comments from the public, we will move on to section 4, treasurer's business.
Okay. I'm asking the board to approve the minutes from June 27th, 2022.
May I have a motion, please?
So moved.
Thank you, Mr. Carpenter.
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Fulham. May Mrs. Kale please call the roll?
Mr. Carpenter?
Aye.
Mr. Fulham?
Aye.
Mr. Leeds?
Aye.
Mrs. Hagedorn?
Aye.
And Mr. Grant?
Aye. Motion carried. Item 4.2.
Next, I'm asking the board to approve the financial report for June 30th, 2022.
May I have a motion, please?
So moved.
Thank you, Mr. Leeds.
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Fulham. The floor is yours, Mrs. Cahill.
Okay. Okay, so I'd like to report that our fiscal year ended on June 30th. And on that date, our balance in the general fund was $32.7 million. Our expenses this year were $26 million, so our cash balance represents 15 months of expenses. During 2022, we added $3.2 million to our cash balance. So, and our ending balance in all our funds is $41.4 million. So on the revenue side, we received $968,000 more from the state through the state foundation. The state implemented the first year of the Fair School Funding Plan. Revenue in other areas declined, but this was offset by the increase in the state aid. Also on the revenue side, we were informed that Rocky Express was filing a tax complaint. They did not pay a part of their taxes during this past year. So we will see how that comes out in the end. The expense side is a little more complex. This past year, even though our salaries and benefits increased by $994,000, our general fund expenses for purchase services and capital outlay were less than the previous year. These expenses were subsidized by grants, both annual grants and that we receive every year, and one-time grants that we can spend through 23 and 24. This year, we spent almost $960,000 out of the annual grants. We actually had more money than usual through our annual grants because we carried over funds from 2020 and 2021 that were not spent during that time. In 2020, our grant expenses went down during part of 2020 because of quarantine. So we had money in the budget for the grants, but then quarantine stopped a lot of things. We stopped paying for subs, we stopped paying for professional development, we didn't have some of the transporting of our special needs students, we didn't even have some of the programs that sometimes we use grants for. So we did save money in 2020. Also, during both 2020 and 21, we received subsidies through federal CARES funds and from other local governments, from the county auditor, from the Bureau of Workers' Comp. Even Limbourne Township gave us money. So all of these subsidies offset expenses to our annual grants as well as to the general fund. Grant money that's not spent is then carried over to the next and following years. And this year, we spent grant funds not only awarded for this year, but that were carried over from previous years. So we spent $1 million out of our one-time grants. These grants offset the expenses in the general fund and purchase services, supplies, and equipment. They also paid for substitutes, salaries, contracted services, and professional developments, among many other general fund expenses. And we also spent $450,000 out of the permanent improvement fund for facility improvements, again offsetting expenses in the general fund. In summary, there were a multitude of factors impacting our bottom line this year, but we are ending on a good note. And we've hired additional staff beginning in 2023. We have a new 3-year contract with our staff. We know that inflation may increase costs 10% or more. We suspect our property tax receipts will go down as a result of that tax complaint. We don't know if the Fair School Funding Plan will continue after fiscal year 2023. So this balance will help us meet our obligations for this coming year and as we head into many unknowns. So please let me know if you have questions.
Any questions?
Not at this time.
Yeah. All right, thank you.
Thank you. All right. Mrs. Kale, please call the roll.
Mr. Leeds?
Aye.
Mr. Fulham?
Aye.
Mrs. Hagedorn?
Aye.
Mr. Carpenter?
Aye.
And Mr. Grant?
Aye. Motion carried. Item 4.3.
Next, I'm asking the board to approve the bond fund for June 30th, 2022.
May I have a motion, please?
So moved.
Thank you, Mrs. Hagedorn.
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Leeds.
I'd like to report that we did not receive revenue. We had $133,656 in interest payments, and the current balance in the bond fund is $3,883,515.
And is all the money where it's supposed to be?
Yes, it is. I forgot to say that.
Thank you. Any other questions? Mrs. Kale, please call the roll.
Mrs. Hagedorn?
Aye.
Mr. Leeds?
Aye.
Mr. Fulham?
Aye.
Mr. Carpenter?
Aye.
And Mr. Grant?
Aye. Motion carried. Item 4.4.
Okay. I'm asking the board to accept the payment from Kroger to compensate for failure of the previous building tenant to meet the obligation for a tax abatement. And I explained, so we received $306,635 from Kroger as a payment in lieu of taxes. This was owed by the previous tenant of the building, Prologis. And I said this will be the last payment we will receive in tax money likely, but they will be paying us $30,000 a year in exchange for the tax abatement. So I'm just asking you to accept this payment from Kroger.
May I have a motion?
So moved.
Thank you, Mr. Fulham.
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Carpenter. Any questions?
Yeah, I got a question on this. This is on the Bed Bath & Beyond building, correct?
That's correct.
Is the restriction, not restriction, but is the rule on this that Kroger will employ people in that building, or are they lumping their buildings together and saying, we're employing people in the warehouse and this building too, and this on this site?
You know, I'm thinking it's that building, but they've been given time to employ those people. There's a period of ramping up, is what it's called. No, I think 2 years.
I mean, correct me if I'm
That
wrong,
was
but
in
these
the
are
agreement.
two totally separate entities from what I understand.
Well, it's two separate buildings, but it's all one corporation, which they can put together on the site and say,
It could,
say
yes.
this is a tax abatement that I agree to have 3,000 employees, and if you have, 1,500 in each site, if you put it together, I got my 3,000. So,
Well, I know there's an abatement on that first building, and there's a
Right.
employee commitment with that first building, but my understanding is the second building, they've given them
okay.
a couple of years. So I
didn't
think
know.
there's actually two abatements that
Okay. That's,
kind of, I don't know, but,
From what our discussion, I believe that they're operating separately.
okay.
The second building, if I'm not mistaken, has nothing to do with the delivery of groceries.
The warehouse, don't quote me on this, but isn't it a warehouse?
Yeah, I
that
think it's
will
gonna
feed
extend.
all the,
It's
not just
gonna-
the distribution centers.
Local.
it's definitely going to subsidize the distribution. I think they
Yeah.
needed it because of the distribution,
Okay.
something like that.
Any other questions? All right, Mrs. Cahill, please call the roll.
Mr. Fulham,
Aye.
Mr. Carpenter,
Aye.
Mr. Leeds,
Aye.
and Mrs. Hagedorn,
Aye.
and Mr. Grant.
Aye. Motion carried. Item 4.5.
I'm asking the board to approve the certificate of total amount from all sources available for expenditure and balances for fiscal year 2023.
May I have a motion?
So moved.
Second. Thank you, Mr. Leeds. Thank you, Mr. Fulham.
Okay?
Any
Okay.
questions on this? Mrs. Cahill, please call the roll.
Mr. Leeds,
Aye.
Mr. Fulham,
Aye.
Mrs. Hagedorn,
Aye.
Mr. Carpenter,
Aye.
and Mr. Grant.
Aye. Motion carried.
Next,
Item 4.6. No, you're good.
I'm asking the board to approve the amended certificate of estimated resources for fiscal year 2023, and this report sort of goes along with the one you just approved.
May I have a motion?
So moved.
Thank you, Mrs. Hagedorn.
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Leeds. Any questions? All right, Mrs. Cahill, please call the roll.
Mrs. Hagedorn,
Aye.
Mr. Leeds,
Aye.
Mr. Fulham,
Aye.
Mr. Carpenter,
Aye.
and Mr. Grant.
Aye. Motion carried. All right, thank you, Mrs. Cahill.
Thank you.
All right, moving on to section 6, superintendent's personnel business. Oh, wait, hold on. 5, superintendent's update.
Thank you, Mr. Grant. I am going to go through and give kind of a district facilities update. This shouldn't be really new information for anybody in this room, but I do want to get it out there. It takes 7 times to share information before it sinks in. So I do want the public to really get a good handle on where we are with our facilities. And we met as a district facilities committee back in May. And I'm going to kind of share with everybody here again what we talked about at that meeting, and then some updates on what we've done this summer, and kind of what we were talking about before of what we have upcoming in the next few years. So, again, we have a committee. It's made up of a number of staff members, parents, community members. We met back in May and kind of went through the whole plan. Start with the former teacher in me. I start with the history of where we were in this district. So if you go to the next slide for us. The first school that this year, independent from Middletown, was the 2000-2001 school year. At that time, there was Monroe Elementary. It was a K-6 building, built in '54 with the addition in 1966. That's the current primary building. And then there was Monroe High School, which was 712 at that time. Prior to that, junior high students had gone to, Tom, help me with this, which?
Verity.
Verity in Middletown. So when the district broke away, that building became 712 instead of just a high school. The new building we're sitting in was completed in 2004, built for a pre-K-12. Pre-K moved back to the primary building in 2007, and then 1 and 2 moved back in 2008. And then that is when I believe the very popular modular city behind the primary building was located, so that's when
People love that.
the following year, second grade moved back to the main campus in 2012, and that is our current configuration since that. If you look at our enrollment history, again, there was 1,433 students when they broke away from Middletown, and then in 04 and 05, they've grown to 1,574. Our current enrollment is just under 3,000 students, 477 at the primary, 2380 at main campus. As I've shared many times, but I want to get that out there again. This building was designed for 1,800 kids, so when I share that we're bursting, I'm not exaggerating. Next one. Currently, the primary, it's preschool, 4 sections, kindergarten and first grade both have 9 sections, 477 students. There is 1 modular, 2 classrooms out there. They are not actual classrooms. I believe there's related services and counselors that are out there, but no actual homeroomers. And then the elementary, which is we're in the elementary cafeteria right now. 9 sections at second and third, 8 sections at the 8, 4, 5, 6. 1,079 elementary students in this building. That is it's a very sizable elementary school. And then junior high, grade 7 and 8. At this time I say grade 8, it'll be grade 9 this coming school year. Is the largest grade in the district with 256 students. Total enrollment is 490. Grades 9 through 12 at the high school. Grade 9, which will be this year, sophomores, will be the second largest. So as you see, there's a, we are growing, but there's a definite bubble at the high school with next year, the 2 largest classes in the district will be 9th and 10th. Short-term projects. So this summer, we added a wall at the second floor. They call that the health room. It's right above the trainer's room. We divide that up into 2 classrooms to create some additional space. The training room is being repurposed. We actually, instead of putting a wall, we're just making it a flexible, so trainer's never in there during the day, so it'll be a classroom during the day, and then the trainer will use, especially in the fall, mostly the trainers are out of the field house. We'll have a small section in the back of the room during the day, or in the evenings during athletic activities. And then the high school junior high media center hadn't been used as an actual media center for a number of years prior to my arrival. This is the one I held out on the longest, but we really just needed the space. So we distributed the majority of the books to the teachers throughout the building, 712, and we're adding more classroom space in the junior high school media center. And then Main Street there, the main hallway there, we call Main Street, we are adding flexible seating there. There'll be overflow for the cafeteria, so they don't have to eat on the bleachers. There's just a quick update. If you can see the upper left, drywall went up today, so that is the wall that separates I'm standing in one half when I took that picture. You can see through the door to the other half. Upper right, that's the trainer's room. They redid the flooring in there, so it'll be a respectable classroom. And then there's 2 pictures of the library at the bottom. And you can see studs are up, the drywall. Started the drywall, and then we have insulation going in. That was taken earlier in the day, so my guess is if you walk down there now, there'd probably be more up. But it's coming along nicely. There's no worry of it not being completed prior to arrival of students. Short-term projects, these are things that we've been talking about infrastructure field house to move some of our athletic facilities that are currently in the building out to that space, and then repurpose those areas to additional classroom spaces. Because again, that is our, that's our number one priority, is academics for our kids and making more academic space for them. And then there is, we have talked about it, about the junior high gym that was designed to actually make 8 classrooms, 4 in the first, 4 in the second. If we did the second, that would be adding square footage, and I've talked about that with, we don't want to take away from the master project someday. So if we can get it approved through ELF, we would add the 4 classrooms on the first floor and wait until the next phase of construction to see if there's the need for the additional floor on the second floor. So the goal would be hopefully to start those projects soon, so they would be ready for hopefully next school year or soon after. But then obviously our ultimate goal is a new school building. I think that's everybody's goal, but I want to go through this real quick so everybody knows the timeline of when that is. So go to the next one for me. So how do we fund a new building? Obviously, that's the big question there. So there's 3 options that we could. We could pay for the building with current school funds, and even though we have a nice cash balance, that's not a realistic solution for us or for really any public school district. Go to the community to pass a bond issue to pay for the construction of a new facility. Or if you are eligible to partner with the state through the Ofcc funding to pay for partial costs, and then go to the public for a bond issue for the remaining funds. And right now, where we are sitting is we are close to the OFCC funding. If you remember back in 2017, we thought our number was up, and the state pulled back because they had overpromised funds. So we went back on the waiting list, and we're hoping that we're about 2 years out from receiving that money. The OFCC Commission was a result of the high school funding system being ruled unconstitutional back in '97. My first year teaching, that's how long ago that was, and they still haven't fixed the school funding in the state of Illinois. But what they did is they ranked all the school districts based on their proper evaluation and income, and they used a formula. And when you talk to the Ohio Department of Education about any kind of funding formula, no one can ever figure it out. But they reevaluated every annually, and back when I believe the project was going to be done in 2016-17, it was 49%.
49%.
49%. We are now, if you want to go to the next slide, our last, real quickly, so it was offered to the district those 2 times in 12 and 13. Financially, it wasn't a good opportunity for the district, as well as at that time it was not a huge overcrowding issue. Then in 17, when it was offered, the district was ready to go, and the state pulled it. And so then we have most recently applied for ELF to OFCC. And I'll explain that here in a second. The OFCC, I said, does an annual review. It was 49% back in 17. Currently, we sit at 71% state funding on a new project, which is extremely high. And to be honest, it would be irresponsible of us not to go in a partnership with the school or the state of Ohio to receive that funding and not put all that on the local taxpayers. So we applied for ELF, which means that would lock that rate in, because it's been steadily climbing, but it's starting to slow down. And the last thing we wanted to do is, in a year when they do a reevaluation, for that percentage to drop. So if they lock that in, then they will not, it'll be set at that 71%, which is a very good thing for us. So we are proceeding with some of the short-term projects right now. And as we get closer, as I've met with architects over the summer, to the different architects to talk about, where we are and everything going, at some point, we need to go out to the community and gather information from the public. If you look the last time, when it was, they did a survey between elementary, high school, and a junior high. The junior high was lower, but elementary and high school was pretty close. We at least need to revisit that with the public. I think enough time passed, we just have to go out and get that information before we proceed. It doesn't really, like I've shared all along, it doesn't matter what our thoughts are, what we think we need, it's what the community is going to support. And there's positives and negatives to both of those. So when we get that information, gather that information, we will, then we'll proceed with those plans. I have talked with the architects about getting information about that, and their advice to us, with their expertise in dealing with many, many districts, is if you get out and do that too far ahead of the project, you lose, it gets the community excited and it gets them on board, and then if you keep waiting and waiting and waiting, your momentum tends to tail off. And so, as we are eligible for help, that means we are a minimum of 2 years out from that. So, we're gonna continue to look at things, we're gonna continue to look at ways to expand our current situation, but as we get notification that we are inside that 2-year window, that's when we really need to ramp up, getting that information and, really get out to the community. Because once our number is full, I believe we have 13 months to pass a bond issue to get our local share of whatever the new project is. Fortunately, that gives us some time to, I know Butler Tech has been a little bit more fortunate because they have this project going and they did a lot of pre-ordering before a lot of I don't know what the right word is for it, but all the huge inflation with construction costs and delay in materials. I know Franklin, who's, our neighbors, they're in the middle of construction and they have run into some serious issues in pricing and availability of materials. So one advantage of not being eligible for a couple of years is hopefully in a couple of years the construction world will settle down, so to speak. I don't know what costs at that time will be, but at least maybe availability of materials.
They're saying roughly from our manufacturers that we deal with, end of '23, beginning of '24 is when the supply chain issues should reach somewhat normalcy. That's what they're predicting now.
Again, I just wanted to, I know as we talk about our space issue and looking at things, and everybody's ready to go. I mean, I'm ready, like if the state called us tomorrow and said, let's build a building, I think everybody in this community would jump on board and embrace that. And actually, when I shared similar information at the joint meeting with the city council, we had people comment that, let's not wait for the state, let's go ahead and put a bond issue and build it ourselves. Well, I mean, that is, when you look at whether you want to enter into the Ofcc project, kind of there are disadvantages to using the state funding because there are certain regulations that you have to follow. So that's one disadvantage. But if it was, we were only getting 30% or 20%, maybe that's something where we need to look at it as a community and say, is it worth it to go through what they're going to make us go through to get it? But when it's 71% funding, you can't ignore that. And like I said, I think it'd be irresponsible of the school district to ignore that. And so, like I said, we are going to continue to move forward with some of the short-term projects to alleviate space. I know the junior high and high school is, they're excited about our new spaces just to help alleviate some of the classroom space. So the kids have a lot more, everybody's got a classroom, which is a nice thing. So we will continue to look at creative ways to make space, and I will keep you guys updated as we move forward. So does anybody have any questions?
No, just a statement. I mean, I know the state, we gotta wait also. Part of this process is to wait for their enrollment numbers, which we hope they change the 10 that we're going to grow by in the next.
So, yes, they do a enrollment projection for 10 years out, and unfortunately, they use only live birth data, which is not a true measure of Monroe because we have a lot of move-ins that bring children in. So there is a way to appeal their enrollment projections, and we have lots and lots of annual data with annual trends to back up our appeal when we get to that process. So.
Any other questions?
Okay.
Thank you.
Yep.
Good update.
Yep.
One other thing with construction this summer, I shared with some of the small projects. Another one, the main gym floor was going to be refinished for, right before school started. It was actually going to bleed into about the first week of school. We knew that. But as with everything in construction, it's been delayed. So Mr. Silverman, Mr. Prohaska, Mr. Stanger, and I put our heads together and we looked at the options. One option was to put it off and be first in line next summer to get it refinished, or to look in between volleyball and basketball season, or after the winter sports are over. The spring season doesn't really make sense because there's not a lot going on in the gym. We might as well wait until then. And in the spring, if PE classes need to go outside, you know how the spring weather is. That's pretty unpredictable. So we actually called the PE teachers and said, here are our options. And they said, it can't wait. It needs done. It's long past due. We will make it work. So right now the schedule is for September 26th. So that is the tail end of volleyball. He's rescheduled some of the last few home games for volleyball. They'll still be able to use the elementary for practice. And it runs into the beginning of basketball season. So it won't be too disruptive to the student athletes, but it will, for the winter season, they will have the full refinish.
So the other thing it'll really affect for winter sports is the prepping.
The
for
practices,
season.
at the
Practices
beginning.
leading up to the
Yeah,
season.
and not even that much of it.
Okay.
To be honest, a few days.
It will be the Monday after the homecoming games, so that won't impact us, and I won't worry about the field being on the floor for the only time ever. And then, the way it would end, if it stays on schedule, the first 2 days of tryouts for girls basketball would have to be in the elementary gym, which is not a problem because we just have high school and junior high. The boys won't start till the following week. So we'll be able to make all that work as long as there's no issue.
As long
What's
as
the
there's no-
contingency on that, though, if we get into a position where we're in process, but something holds us up at that point, where do we have a contingency, or is it just,
Well,
we've
if
got
we're-
one gym to?
If we're starting September 26th, I believe the first actual game is until November 19th. So I think, worst case scenario, they would have to use just the elementary gym for practice.
Do we have alternate options at adjoining schools or facilities? Just
We would
worst
probably-
case scenario?
We'd probably reach out to, we already talked about, if, like, another option we talked about was like if we did it over winter break and then just scheduled all practices and games during that time at maybe Miami Middletown or Miami Hamilton. And we have connections at both places that if for some reason we had to do that, we could, look into space there to get us students.
How much time does it take to refurbish?
So the actual refinishing takes about two to 3 weeks, and then another week just
To let it cure.
to stay off of it. So it's about a month process.
How often do we do that?
It's supposed to be done about every 10 to 12 years, and it's never been done here. So,
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Wow.
So the plan was this summer, the main gym, next summer, the elementary gym.
Can we be first in line in the summer for the elementary gym?
Yes, that's definitely something we can try to get on their schedule and hopefully.
Does this count towards our ELP fund? Is this part of our,
The
money that we need to
The main
spend
one,
to-
no, just because we still
Improvement
haven't
funds.
received final approval on it yet, but hopefully the elementary will.
Gotcha, okay.
All right. Is that it? Yes. All right, thank you. Moving on to Section 6, Superintendent's Personnel Business, item 6.1.
It is recommended that the board approve the following resignations.
May I have a motion, please?
So moved.
Thank you, Mrs. Hagedorn.
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Leeds.
Yep, over there.
Any questions? Mrs. Cahall, please call the roll.
Mrs. Hagedorn,
Aye.
Mr. Leeds,
Aye.
Mr. Fulham,
Aye.
Mr. Carpenter,
Aye.
Mr. Grant.
Aye. Motion carried. Item 6.2.
It's recommended the board approve an MOU with the Monroe Education Association on salary schedule placement for Brett Mustin.
May I have a motion?
So moved.
Thank you, Mr. Fulham.
Second.
Thank you, Mrs. Hagedorn. Any questions? Mrs. Cahall, please call the roll.
Mr. Fulham,
Aye.
Mrs. Hagedorn,
Aye.
Mr. Leeds,
Aye.
Mr. Carpenter,
Aye.
and Mr. Grant.
Aye. Motion carried. Item 6.3.
It is recommended the board hire the following new employees.
May I have a motion, please?
So moved.
Thank you, Mr. Fulham.
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Carpenter. Any questions?
Welcome aboard.
Yes, welcome.
Mrs. Cahall, please call the roll.
Mr. Fulham,
Aye.
Mr. Carpenter,
Aye.
Mr. Leeds,
Aye.
Mrs. Hagedorn,
Aye.
and Mr. Grant.
Aye. Motion carried.
Pens?
Do you have your pens?
I do have my
You
pens.
a couple teachers that are
All right.
Wait very patiently, waiting
All
for
right.
section 6.3.
All right, we'll get a picture.
You want to come on up? They're going to...
Welcome aboard.
Do you guys want to get in the middle? Or? All right, 1, 2, 3, choose. Gotcha. And congratulations.
Thank you.
Good evening, guys.
Yeah.
All right.
Bump that up to 2.1 or something.
Item 6, item 6.4.
It's recommended the board approve the following substitutes.
May I have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Thank you, Mrs. Hagedorn. Thank you, Mr. Carpenter. Any questions? Mrs. Cahall, please call the roll.
Mrs. Hagedorn,
Aye.
Mr. Carpenter,
Aye.
Mr. Leeds,
Aye.
Mr. Fulham,
Aye.
and Mr. Grant.
Aye. Motion carried. Item 6.5.
It's recommended the board approve the following extracurricular contracts.
May I have a motion?
So moved.
Thank you, Mr. Fulham.
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Carpenter. Any questions? All right, Mrs. Cahall, please call the roll.
Mr. Fulham,
Aye.
Mr. Carpenter,
Aye.
Mr. Leeds,
Aye.
Mrs. Hagedorn,
Abstain.
and Mr. Grant.
Aye. Motion carried. Item 6.6.
It's recommended the board approve the paraprofessional extra supervision for the morning students attend school.
May I have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Leeds. Thank you, Mrs. Hagedorn. Any questions? This is just an ongoing, this is what we did last year, and just another.
We have some special needs students that, due to transportation needs, arrive
Yeah.
earlier or leave later, and so it goes beyond the contractual day for some of the paraprofessionals. So.
All right, Mrs. Cahall, please call the roll.
Mr. Leeds,
Aye.
Mrs. Hagedorn,
Aye.
Mr. Fulham,
Aye.
Mr. Carpenter,
Aye.
and Mr. Grant.
Aye. Motion carried. Item 6.7.
It's recommended the board approve the following teachers to receive stipends for teaching additional preparation periods for the MEA Master Agreement, Article 18.2.
May I have a motion?
So moved.
Thank you, Mr. Carpenter. Thank you, Mr. Fulham. Any questions on 6.7? Mrs. K. Please call the roll.
Mr. Carpenter?
Aye.
Mr. Fulham?
Aye.
Mr. Leeds?
Aye.
Mrs. Hagedorn?
Aye.
And Mr. Grant?
Aye. Motion carried. And item 6.8.
It's recommended the board approve paying the stipends per page 100 of the MEA agreement. Any teacher that teaches advanced placement or college credit plus course, they receive $1,000 annual stipend.
May I have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Leeds. Thank you, Mr. Fulham. Any questions? Mrs. Cahill, please call the roll.
Mr. Leeds?
Aye.
Mr. Fulham?
Aye.
Mrs. Hagedorn?
Aye.
Mr. Carpenter?
Aye.
Mr. Grant?
Aye, motion carried. And moving on to section 7, superintendent's other business, 7.1.
7.1, it's recommended the board approve the following donations.
May I have a motion?
So moved.
Thank you, Mr. Fulham.
Second.
Thank you, Mrs. Hagedorn. Thank you for those donations.
Yep,
Yep,
thank you
agreed.
much.
Thank you.
So baseball's gonna get a pitching machine.
I thought that was you.
It was my arm shot, so not anymore. Any other questions? Mrs. Kale, please call the roll.
Mr. Fulham?
Aye.
Mrs. Hagedorn?
Aye.
Mr. Leeds?
Aye.
Mr. Carpenter?
Aye.
And Mr. Grant?
Aye, motion carried. Item 7.2.
It's recommended to approve the athletic handbook revisions.
May I have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Fulham. Thank you, Mrs. Hagedorn. Any questions on 7.2?
I just want to say I did read through it, and I was thankful that the changes were highlighted in yellow to stand out. It was very helpful.
Yes. Yes.
I admittedly have not read through it. Is there anything in there that we need to talk about?
No, it's all,
I'm sure it's all buttoned up.
it's fine.
Aye. Mrs. Cahill, please call the roll.
Mr. Fulham?
Aye.
Mrs. Hagedorn?
Aye.
Mr. Leeds?
Aye.
Mr. Carpenter?
Aye.
And Mr. Grant?
Aye, motion carried. And item 7.3.
It's recommended to approve the renewal of property and liability coverage for fiscal year 2023 in the amount of $51,767. And as you can see, that is an increase, 20% increase, which is substantial. But as Holly pointed out during the Finance Committee back in 2012, I believe, when you switched companies, they were paying more than that at that time. So she saved us a lot of money over the last 10 years, and it's finally reached where we were prior to her switching.
May I have a motion?
So moved.
Thank you, Mr. Leeds.
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Fulham. Any questions? Mrs. Cahill, please call the roll.
Mr. Leeds?
Aye.
Mr. Fulham?
Aye.
Mrs. Hagedorn?
Aye.
Mr. Carpenter?
Aye.
And Mr. Grant?
Aye, motion carried. Item 7.4.
It's recommended to approve the high school code of conduct changes.
May I have a motion?
So moved.
Thank you, Mr. Carpenter.
Second.
Thank you, Mrs. Hagedorn. Any questions on 7.4?
No highlights.
No highlights.
No highlight.
No highlights.
I did read through it. Just
Did you?
to- Yeah, it's important information. I think all parents should take a look through that.
I agree.
It's not as good a reading as the Neola.
Any considerable changes that parents should focus on? No.
No, not anything I saw.
Nope.
Mrs. Cahill, please call the roll.
Mr. Carpenter?
Aye.
Mrs. Hagedorn?
Aye.
Mr. Leeds?
Aye.
Mr. Fulham?
Aye.
And Mr. Grant?
Aye, motion carried. Item 7.5.
It's recommended to approve the annual pricing agreement adjustment with Sodexo. It's a 5% increase for our current employees.
May I have a motion?
So moved. Second.
Thank you, Mrs. Hagedorn. Thank you, Mr. Leeds. Any questions?
Could I make a quick comment on
Yes.
this? This is, again, just a 5% increase for their current base salary. I shared with the board last Friday, I believe, that in a comparison, I did a salary study with, a lot of the other local comparable districts, and currently, we are very low on the end there for custodial salaries. So Holly and I will be getting with Jesse and trying to make a plan to see what we can do to get our salaries more competitive for our custodial staff. There is a lot of turnover in that department. I believe that's probably a big reason why. So any additional changes to that, obviously I present to the board prior to bringing it to them.
Okay. Any questions? Mrs. Cahill, please call the roll.
Mrs. Hagedorn?
Aye.
Mr. Leeds?
Aye.
Mr. Fulham?
Aye.
Mr. Carpenter?
Aye.
And Mr. Grant?
Aye. Motion carried. Item 7.6.
It's recommended to approve the resolution of urgent necessity and agreement with Air Force One for domestic boiler replacement.
May I have a motion, please?
So moved.
Thank you, Mr. Carpenter. Thank you, Mr. Fulham. Any questions?
I did. I read that it was, I think, a 12 to 14 week lead time.
Yes.
Would we look at installing that at winter break or spring break? Have we thought that far ahead?
The one that, I don't think the actual replacement, it probably could be
Okay.
done over a weekend or something. I don't
Okay.
think. The actual replacement takes long. It's just that as everything, it's way backed up. And the main campus one is still working order, but it's the same age as the one that went out in the field house or close to it. And so we did get a little price break by doing two. And the worst thing that would happen is if, let's say, in November, the hot water heater goes out, and when we have to wait, it's the one that supplies the kitchen, and we don't want to be without hot water in the
Right.
kitchen for 16 weeks. So as soon as those get in, they'll be replaced.
Okay.
It's a kind of a cheesy warranty, I think. 1 year on a boiler,
Water heater.
water heater for that type that we have. Still don't know.
Unfortunately, it's pretty difficult.
What's a warranty?
Chinese, right?
Yes. What fund is this being paid out of the general fund or PI fund?
It was we said PI.
Yeah,
We're
PI?
doing PI.
PI fund?
That was, that's what was requested.
Okay. All right, any other questions? All right, Mrs. Cahill, please call the roll.
Mr. Carpenter?
Aye.
Mr. Fulham?
Aye.
Mr. Leeds?
Aye.
Mrs. Hagedorn?
Aye.
And Mr. Grant?
Aye, motion carried. Item 7.7 is no longer. 7.8.
That's just the calendar of upcoming events.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Busker. Before we move to Section 8, we'll start with comments from the board. We'll start with Mr. Leeds.
Glad to see everything is moving forward as far as our in-house construction, and everybody's getting the new hires on board, ready to go, ready to fire the shot. So, and activity in out on the fields and everything looks great. Appreciate it.
Mrs. Hagedorn?
So I'm excited for the school year to be starting here soon. And I'm excited, like Tom had just said, the activities in the parking lot and on the fields. I know that Pee Wee football had their camp earlier. Pee Wee Cheer is having theirs this week, and band started their pre-camp today. Band camp's next week. And then congratulations to Monroe Cheer. And I will let AJ get into details on that instead of having duplications going on.
She's relinquishing.
All right. This is where I should step down because I don't have any.
Is that it?
That's it for right now.
Mr. Fulham?
All right, when I started this whole mess, I didn't realize how slow the summer was, but I've managed to pull a few high fives from around the hive, so here we go. All right. High five to our cheerleading program who recently attended the Uca Cheer Camp at Ohio Northern University. Our varsity team earned the following distinctions: 6 All-Americans, 5 Pennant Forward recipients, 2 Top Team Gold Superior ribbons, first place for camp dance, first place overall for game day on the final day championships, and the most important and highly coveted Top Banana Award, which, if you guys saw the photos floating around, there's an inflatable banana that is very highly sought after for these teams, and our girls brought it home. So hats off to the time and effort that went into that. High fives all around to the boys and girls soccer programs for hosting a successful camp for our youth soccer players. It's awesome to see our elementary and junior high school student athletes learning from our coaches and players. Thanks to all involved in providing this great opportunity for our next generation of Hornets. High five to Majors Family Farms, who has raised 5 acres of sweet corn to help raise money for the Monroe football program and Monroe youth sports organizations. And high five to our football players who spent time at the farm assisting the community members to obtain their ears of corn. I made 2 passes, and it was very helpful to have the kids there helping out and being present, and thanks to Majors for supplying that. I didn't see the total yet, but I'm sure we'll have that here soon. And I think they have another couple acres that they're harvesting. So if you haven't had a chance, stop by and get some corn at Majors.
And it's sold out Saturday, so
Oh, yeah.
better get there early.
I went there late Saturday, and so there's like 3 decent pieces, so that's what I took. But yeah, make sure you get out there early, because seriously, it goes fast, and it does go to a great cause. So thanks again. And then I want to give a high five to junior Ty Gronestay, who participated and won a United States Youth Sports National Championship over the weekend with his club team. So very excited to bring home a national title with one of our players here at Monroe. So congratulations, Ty.
Very good.
And that's all I got.
All right.
One more thing. School starts on the 17th. There has been some confusion. I know there's been a lot of communication. I've had a couple people reach out, and I myself even had the wrong date on a calendar on my phone. So just make sure, for all 5 people that are listening right now, make sure you got the 17th. It is the 17th, Wednesday, the first day of school for your students. 7, 8? That's what happens when you got high fives.
Can I
Debbie had
piggyback? I want to
something real quick.
piggyback on AJ.
Yes.
I don't think he's aware. He did mention that 6 of the Monroe cheerleaders got the American All-Star cheerleading opportunity. And what that is they were one of the stars at camp and were recognized in an honor and a privilege, and that they will have an opportunity to go and be a cheer at one of the Thanksgiving Day parades.
Oh, nice.
I know that, it's up to them and their parents if they want to do that, but there is an invitation there to go represent at a Thanksgiving Day parade. So I think that's pretty amazing. And there's 6,
Fantastic.
which is a high number. Usually it's 0, 1, or 2 maybe. So to have 6 is pretty impressive.
Good.
All right, well, my turn. So I was going to mention Ty and his accomplishment, which is really exciting. So it's a United States Youth Soccer National Championship.
I'm sorry, did I say that wrong?
So what's exciting about this is, so his team, right, it's Cincinnati United Premier, it's local to program. They not only had, so it takes, you have to qualify through a state cup tournament, then you travel to regionals, then you travel to nationals. So on their route to winning the national title, they actually beat the #1 ranked team in the country. So then they went on to play a team that they had lost to for the nationals, like the National League. They lost to them 1-0, ended up beating them 2-0. So very, very exciting. Like, that is really, really cool for a local team like that to win a national championship. Like that, it's a big club. It's the first one to win a national championship. So it's really exciting.
Yeah.
I might want to add, coached by a friend of mine that's a coach at Moeller High School.
I was leaving that out of my comments.
And it also has 4 Moeller guys on the team. So, but congratulations to Ty. That's really, really exciting. I believe Sarah Deaton also participated in the national tournament with her, but she played up 2 years, or up 1 year.
Up 2 years, yep.
With a King's Hammer team. So that's also very exciting. But yeah, so just big congratulations. Like, that is something that just happens maybe once. So I hope they repeat next year, but, you know, celebrate, and if you see them, give them a high five, fist bump, slap on the back. But,
So where's Moeller High School?
9001 Montgomery Road.
Where's their football field?
Does not compute. But yeah, so, yeah.
Good.
I'm done now.
All right, very good.
That was a lot for you.
I know, I'm excited.
you are
I love
excited.
soccer, man.
Yeah.
Yes, you do.
The only thing I'm going to say is to piggyback on what Robert mentioned earlier, the importance of the next year, the year and a half. I know we as a board are going to be working diligently and to make sure that all our i's are dotted, t's are crossed, to make sure that when we go into this next level, we are prepared, because it's going to be a fast-moving train once it gets going. So, so I'm excited for the community. It's going to be fast-paced, but it's going to be exciting times for the community as well, and for our staff and our students. Other than that, I hope everyone's enjoying their summer, and that is it for me.
Yeah.
So with that said, we will move on to Section 8, where we adjourn to executive session. It is recommended that the board adjourn to executive session to consider items that are a statutory confidentiality exception, revised code 121.22 G5. No action will be taken. May I have a motion? Thank you, Mr. Fulham. Thank you, Mr. Carpenter. Mrs. Kayall, please call the roll.
Mr. Fulham?
Aye.
Mr. Carpenter?
Aye.
Mr. Leeds?
Aye.
Mrs. Hagedorn?
Aye.
And Mr. Grant?
Aye. Motion carried. Thank you for attending.
Thanks, guys.